enforcement that we saw in the city of Dallas. So, it's hard to answer the question because the key component here is the amount of discretion that has been left. I think that discretion it really creates an inconsistency. It really makes it hard for our prosecution. Quite frankly, it's really hard for, I would imagine, a prosecutor to look at very similar cases that have been tossed out, or vice versa, that have been prosecuted, and wanting to see them tossed out, and it creates an inconsistency there. And so overall, right now, we're just kind of the wild, wild west, as my colleague Paula Blackman on the Dallas City Council says often. It is the wild, wild west. We see it kind of all over the place. But fast forward a few years, we did get a new police chief, Eddie Garcia, who ended up coming down here to Austin for a little while. As soon as he was hired, before he even started, a few months in, I knew he was coming from California, and I was like, I'm just going out on a limb and hoping that I know where he stands coming from California. So I called and had a meeting with him virtually before he ever even made it to the city of Dallas, and asked, what would you be willing to do? I've been trying to decriminalize since I've been here. Our old chief wasn't interested. He said, let's do it. He said, let's do it. Let's not even make it a policy deal that the council is forcing the police to do it. I'll come in and I'll make this my first general order change, which was incredible. And he did. He came in and made the policy change. I'll tell you that once it came from someone who was wearing a badge versus this progressive liberal on the council that the cops, quite frankly, don't like, it was the best thing since sliced bread. The police associations thought this was great. This is going to save us resources. This is amazing. And then we really did start to see an impact on the enforcement came forward. So I think the buy-in, and again, it comes to that law enforcement discretion. Just all it took was the buy-in from the lead guy with the badge, and then it was an eye opener for the police force to understand that it was a waste of their time. And we've seen them slowly start to diminish on the enforcement side.
Yeah, and I would just jump in and just emphasize that point about that law enforcement buy-in, because that's something that we've seen also in Houston, is that if you can convince officers that makes it less work for them and that they can do other kinds of work, that's a really good way to get them on board with it. Anything that adds work is going to meet with resistance. Yeah. Councilmember Siegel?
Right on. Well, I would say right now, Austin Travis County is a relatively friendly jurisdiction, in particular because I think neither our district attorney nor our county attorney have much interest in prosecuting low-level possession offenses. But I don't know if that chart is up there anymore. But unfortunately, you'll see on that chart that in recent years, enforcement has been creeping up. So kind of the backstory in Austin, especially in 2020, I was not on council, but council member now, Congressman Greg Casar, and others pushed, as part of the larger movement for Black Lives, there's something called the Freedom Cities Initiative. And it's just to avoid unnecessary interactions between law enforcement and the people. And so at that point, they did revise the general orders, and they made it very cumbersome for officers to actually conduct misdemeanor marijuana possession offenses. You basically had to give supervisor permission. They also banned city payment for the THC testing. And so they basically created some obstacles to enforcement that dramatically decreased arrests and citations. And I remember then Councilmember Sara telling me that it went from several thousand tickets a year to several dozen. So the low point was basically post those 2020 reforms, although that was also during COVID. There's not as much interaction on the streets in general. Then in 22, we passed this ordinance. But unfortunately, in the last few years, the enforcement's been picking back up. And I think this goes to another challenge with local reform, right? If there's not statewide or national reform, it really takes a lot of effort to keep pressure and transparency for police departments to keep enforcement low. So basically, since 2020, the low point in Austin, we've had several different police chiefs. We've had different city managers. And so like all the institutional knowledge of kind of the initial city leadership that were invested in the policy reform, that's all gone away. And so there's been less attention to this issue. And now, as Councilman Bazaldua shared, like it's now up to individual officers whether they feel like doing this or not. And that, unfortunately, is where bias comes into play. If they want to mess with a certain group of people, now they have this pretext they could use. If the police chief isn't paying attention, the arrests start to creep up again. So I will say I was recently appointed to the Public Safety Committee, and I'm hoping to have a hearing on this in a couple months, and hopefully we can bring those numbers down again.
Yeah, well, good luck. I hope so. And I wanted to ask also about the decriminalization that did pass at the city level, right? So my understanding, the AG challenged some of those, and can you just tell us sort of what the status is right now of some of those lawsuits, where they sort of sit in the system? Because I frankly am a little fuzzy myself on that.
Okay, yeah, I looked this up last night. So unfortunately, local ordinances that ban some aspect of marijuana enforcement have been overruled by the appellate courts, and that they rigged the judicial system in the state. You all might be aware of this. They created a new court called the 15th Court of Appeals, where any case that the Attorney General gets into, the appeal goes there instead of our more locally elected judges. And so this Austin's policy, the local courts upheld the policy, but then it was appealed to this 15th Circuit, and that court issued a ruling overturning Austin's policy, and by extension, San Marcos, Killeen, Arc Heights, Elgin. The Dallas policy and the Lockhart policies are still in effect to some extent, although it depends on local discretion. Because those policies, they kind of had a fallback option. So first it says, no officer shall arrest or cite for low-level misdemeanor marijuana possession, except if it's a violent crime or major drug investigation. So that's what the ordinance has said. But then in Dallas and in Lockhart, it also says, well, if that part is struck down, just make marijuana enforcement the lowest priority, right? And so that position still exists. That's still 100% legal in Texas. And that's rooted in this overall power we have in our state constitution. Texas being a very, pro-liberty state, especially when it was founded, basically treated cities as little city states. So there's this home rule authority where cities have all the powers of the state government except what is specifically preempted. Unfortunately, in 1989, the state did pass this preemption bill. It comes out of San Marcos because there's been this long-standing fight in San Marcos to legalize weed. And at some point, someone put this little bill into a rider, and it's Texas Government Code 370.003, I think. And it basically says no municipality can pass a law that prevents the full enforcement of drug laws. And so that was then used to strike down the Austin policy and other policies, because these ordinances said, no arrests or citations in certain circumstances. It said no THC testing. And so that is now the law of the land, but there is still this opportunity to deprioritize locally until the state gets its act together.
Yeah, well, thank you for that update. And so, you mentioned sort of the lower priority, or the sort of policy, maybe not an official policy. Are there other things that state and local leaders can do to, if not officially decriminalize, to deprioritize and follow the wishes of their voters, despite what the state might want?
Yeah, I'll tackle that. I think that I think coming to this conference and looking around the room and seeing several faces that I saw even at the Capitol, thank y'all for all of the advocacy work that you all do. But I think that there's a lack of emphasis, quite frankly, on the importance of your local leaders supporting this legislation and supporting these causes. Just as we've mentioned, I think that we've probably heard the word discretion up here on the stage more than anything. And without there being oversight and accountability to your municipal administrators, which is going to come from your elected officials, then we're going to see that discretion tilt more towards lack of accountability, quite frankly. And just as Councilmember Siegel mentioned, when you see a revolving door or a turnover rate of your city staff and seeing how that can vary, the tone of your city's priority, it should be set by your elected officials. So I encourage y'all to get more engaged with your localities and hold their feet to the fire to make sure that their city managers are on board with what it is. A lot of times you can hear some fluff, right? And there's nothing that we can do. But I know that the city manager knows what the expectation is of the council at this time, which means she can hold our police chief's feet to the fire. when I also believe that engaging your communities and your local advocacy on many fronts, trying to get your police associations to understand what freeing up resources looks like, and then also just simply making sure that your localities have it on their legislative agenda to proactively engage with their delegation and the legislature on what the benefit can look like for the cities. One thing that we are lacking in our state, and I mean, I know we can get further into that, is of course the alternative revenue source that this would bring for the state of Texas. We pride ourselves in being a no income tax state, and this is one unique opportunity that even municipalities would have to come up with certain policies, which I believe is very important through the licensing pieces of legislation for us to have set aside specifically to address certain needs. Now, I think those are going to vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but I would like to see it come back to communities that the substance itself has plagued so hard, like mine. I believe that there's a full turn moment that we can see that the proceeds and the revenues generated from a substance who has really torn communities apart could potentially be the fix for bringing in investment to underserved and underinvested communities.
Yeah, and I'll add into that. I'm a personal believer in civil disobedience, and so I got on TikTok and smoked weed, and was like, "Is the sheriff going to come arrest me? What are you going to do?" And you talked about your brother. When I was in high school, my senior year, and I convinced my mom to let me and some girlfriends, I lived in Alabama at the time, we went to Panama City Beach, Florida, and we were staying at the, Motel 6 across the street from the beach, and 8 o'clock at night, we're sitting on the beach at the fancy condo on their chairs, and before we knew it, there's a cop's flashlight in our face, and he's like, "What are you doing?" And I threw my joint in the sand, and they didn't find it, and he didn't arrest me. I was a little white girl, right? And so he's like, "Where are your parents?" I'm like, "Well, they're at home." He's like, called my mom and drove me back to the Motel 6 and dropped my 17-year-old butt off and said, "Be smarter about it." You know what I mean? And so I think that it's really critical that those of us that are in positions where, what are you going to do? Come and take it. Like, come past my ranch gate, come search my house. No one has the balls to do that. So that's what it takes. It takes people that look like me, that are in positions of power, to say enough is enough. And it's really unfair. Like, Joe Rogan is making millions of dollars while at the same time, right, that musician that got arrested in Dallas makes the national news, right? And it's embarrassing. So I think it is more of like open civil disobedience, and those of us that are in positions of privilege and power to continue calling it out.
Can I add to that too? Yeah, the privilege and power piece is very important. I want to thank you for bringing that point up. What I believe we also need to see, and I hate to really frame it this way, but we have had an opioid crisis in our country for decades. Right now, all of a sudden, it's a priority. Why did it become a priority? Because the introduction of synthetic fentanyl and the facets of life that it has now touched is no longer the average homeless Black male who is suffering from heroin addiction on the street that legislatures across the country could care less about. It's now touching other substances like cocaine, more affluent, white people. We're seeing deaths in law schools across the country. You're seeing legislators, family members who are being impacted. When we start seeing the disparity really being highlighted by having equal enforcement, seeing this touch other facets of life, I believe that's when we're going to see the eye open, because it's just as much a priority, in my opinion, for it to be made sure that this doesn't blur. This blurs through demographic lines. Our privilege to speak on these topics, being people who are not the ones who have been plagued by this legislation, is a huge step in the right direction. But then once we start seeing the impact in the communities of those who haven't been prioritized, that's what I believe it's going to take. I don't know that we're going to convince even, across the aisle. I don't think that I'm going to shock y'all to tell you I identify as a Democrat, but that across the aisle, we're going to see that the prioritization of just the revenue alone, right? There's all of these arguments that you can have for why this is good policy, as Councilmember Siegel mentioned. None of those are going to matter until we start seeing the negative impacts that we are trying to highlight that's been going on in our country for decades, until it hits a different demographic of people.
Yeah, I'm glad you both raised really 2 points there. And I have a few things that I just want to note also. Overdose crisis, very close to my heart, a big thing that I focus on. And you're right that the focus and the attention changed when the demographics changed. And what we're seeing now with that, just as an aside, and it's cannabis related, but the rates now are highest among Black men once again because of the way that fentanyl has penetrated urban drug markets. And coincidentally, we've also seen a decline in enthusiasm for investment in things like treatment, which the legislature last year didn't invest any resources in. So I think that goes to the point of who's being affected and how we spend those resources. And Sarah, to your note about the fact that there are people making millions of dollars off of something that other people are still being punished for, we're seeing that on the hemp side too, where there have been cases of people being arrested, kids being arrested, suspended from school for having vape pens that they bought in legal state licensed stores. And I find that alarming and so concerning, and just a very poor reflection on our policy. And I hope it's something that we can work out. And one more question just for Sarah. I wanted to go back just to the idea of, we've been talking about discretion and the discretion that police officers have. And I wanted to ask you about your discretion as a district attorney, because I think it might differ slightly in terms of the latitude that you might have under state law. And I just wanted to ask you about that and what ability you have.
Yeah. So as a DA, we take an oath that our job is to seek justice, not convictions. And they, I guess, to target really Jose Garza, they created what they call the rogue prosecutor bill. So we are not allowed to say that we don't punish certain classes of crime. So like I said earlier, there are certain marijuana cases that come across my desk where I'm like, okay, this one deserves some time and investigation and some testing. And so I do prosecute marijuana cases, but I do it with the discretion of seeking justice. And so just like any other case.
Very political answer.
It's true though.
No, it was a good one.
Well, certainly, right. We've seen a lot of action at the state level that is intended to curtail local discretion. And I think you can make the argument that the lawsuits against the local decrim ordinances were perhaps less about opposition to marijuana decrim and more about opposition to that local authority. I think, especially given that so many of the places that did it were, strong Republican areas. But that's my opinion on the issue. Looking ahead, I wanted to ask you all. So, right now, Texas does not have a regulated adult use market, but we have expanded the medical program. I think, it's perhaps a matter of time, a matter of change in leadership before we do get to a point where we have some sort of legalization in a regulated market. And as local representatives, I wanted to ask you, if we move to that market, what parts of it do you think that local government should control? Zoning laws, density, signage, like what would you all like to see local jurisdictions have authority over in that kind of marketplace?
Well, I would like to see us be able to regulate the access and equity of licensing. I think that's one of the things we can control most. We're going to have, of course, a huge say in zoning, making sure that there's density, signage, buffer zones for sensitive areas, similar to that of alcohol establishments. But the last thing I want to see is this 0 to 60 and it open up opportunity for only those who have the means. I don't want to see this just be a corporate profit opportunity. I'd like to see this be an opportunity for some small business generation in our city. And we have to be thoughtful in policy at the local level to allow for that. So regulating certain ratios, if you will, depending on I don't know if it's by a geographic description, or if it's going to be based on maybe even a tiered approach of the cost. But if you allow for the prices of licensing to be set so high that it's unobtainable for small business owners, if you require for a certain amount of retail locations to be inclusive of your license agreements, you're automatically excluding a lot of the participation. So aside from the revenue generated that I would love to see policy be crafted to go back into the communities who have been underserved, I also want those communities who have been underserved to have the same opportunity to open up retail locations, to participate in the industry that's being opened up, and to really benefit from such monumental and historical legislation. I don't know that that's been a priority in anywhere. I think that it was attempted with a fail in Colorado. And I think that we can learn, quite frankly. There's a blessing in disguise for us being so far behind the curve, because we've been able to see the do's and don'ts across the country from almost every other state and how they've taken this up. And we should be looking very thoughtfully on how we can craft something that's more equitable.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a Republican, so I believe in small governance and as local as possible. And if you live someplace and they don't want you, I mean, look at the Woodlands, for example. They don't allow signs higher than however many feet, right? And good luck finding Walmart, but when you're not from there, right? Like, if that's what your local area wants to do, fine. But I completely agree that we need to look at how other states have done it and maybe learn some lessons. And I am hopeful. I mean, look at places like Oklahoma or Mississippi, where they're just as red as we are, and lo and behold, they seem to be doing okay with it. And so, but I agree that there needs to be a chance for, last thing we need, for example, is to say, well, if you've ever had a felony, you can't have a license or be involved. Well, yeah, that 1978 possession of a marijuana, it's still haunting people. So I think that there is very much maybe some statewide quality. I want to make sure that I'm not having lead or heavy metals and things like that needs to be regulated more on a statewide level. And then after that, it should be up to the states, the local areas with how they want to govern.
I think y'all really said a lot. I mean, I'm originally from Oakland, California, and I feel like there's a lot of lessons we learned about California's legalization, right? And I know a lot of the small businesses that started when it was opened up have now failed, and there's this major consolidation happening, similar to a lot of other aspects of our economy, right? So to me, to support local small businesses would be wonderful. To create a fund that communities can use to kind of remedy the historic impact of over criminalization of this product. I mean, that would be great. But I think, yeah, I haven't said what.
Yeah, and I would just, on the kind of equity part of it, I would just note that a lot of states and localities that have tried it, especially at the state level, I don't know of one state level equity program that hasn't faced a legal challenge over some part of its process. There's a lot of, it's very difficult to get it right, and to get that balance between having equity applicants and also ensuring quick access, right? So that there's not this sort of gray market that moves in the interim. And the other thing that I would just note about some of these programs, one of the challenges that we see is a lot of co-optation, where or you call it tokenism, where they have one person of color that they have as partly an owner. And then once the license is approved, that person gets pushed out, right? So these are the things that we've seen that I would hope to see protection against. I could continue with questions, but I do want to give an opportunity for the audience to ask questions of our panelists here. Yeah.
But we learned a lot about what it takes, especially later.
To codify
some kind of mechanism to protect people from backlash and self-reporting, you know, especially in an industry where it's confusing. There are two different industries going on. People may unintentionally come into possession of too much cannabis. Vendors may unintentionally overvend. How important is it, do you think, to allow for them to do that without fear of immediate repercussion and potentially losing their business or going to jail?
Well, I think that's why we need regulation. There was Senate Bill 53 and Senate Bill 54 last session introduced by Senator Nathan Johnson that I believe was a great start, a great framework that we could have been moving from. But I think that, again, it comes down to that word discretion that doesn't allow for us to have any type of consistent regulation. Someone who wants to see full legalization, I want it because of regulation. And the lack thereof is one that is going to, quite frankly, impact some people more than others. I think that some of the mistakes that you just mentioned are ones that will be handled differently depending on who are the culprit. And when you're looking at where money talks, that's what I want to make sure that we are able to shore up before it goes out of hand. And that's where we really do have to lean on our legislature for. Regardless, I mean, I think that there's a zero-sum approach often out of Austin, instead of really digging in with a scalpel on what legislation can look like. That framework that Senator Johnson put forward could have easily been amended and made out to be something that could have been more palatable. Without anything at all, and with throwing the baby out with the bathwater, we're left where we are, unfortunately. And I do believe that you're going to see some people disproportionately be impacted than others.
Yeah, and I'll say no good deed goes unpunished. So, and as an oil and gas lawyer, I tell people there's actually a lot of, I think, kind of parallels between the oil and gas industry and the cannabis industry, as far as people want to invest in it, but they don't understand, like, unless you've tried to grow it and have a true appreciation for like how difficult it actually is to grow and be consistent and have products that are consistent. And yeah, if you're growing and all of a sudden you're hitting at 0.05 and now you're just supposed to toss that, like, that doesn't work, right? And so I think that I think until you have full decriminalization and full legalization of the entire plant, you're going to continue to run into those problems. That's going to be selective enforcement. And then it's just, who are you paying and who are your buddies? And, but it's very much a beg forgiveness, don't ask permission kind of thing, I think, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Eric. Follow up.
It's
Right for the camera.
for the camera to put in.
So my question is, how do I find out what the law enforcement policy is in my county? We see the constables driving by all the time, but what are they thinking? And what do they react to? And, if we smoke in our backyard, are we at risk of doing that? How do you find out?
Try it. I mean, no, really, like, this is my perspective. Don't drive around. Don't smoke and drive, right? It's not safe. It doesn't have the same, you're not creating your eye nystagmus like you do with alcohol, and like, right, biologically it's different, but it's not safe to be smoking and doing any sort of thing while you're driving. So don't, right? And if you don't do it in your car and they can't smell it, then if they pull you over because you didn't signal or you stopped beyond the line or another ticky-tacky driving thing, they're not going to mess with you. No one's coming into your house. Like, I have not heard of anyone, unless you are selling and you are and I'm talking like major dealer, crossing state lines, like thousands and thousands of dollars. No one in law enforcement has time for that, right? We're going after pedophiles. Like, that's what we're doing. So don't diddle little kids and don't smoke weed in your car, and they're probably going to leave you alone.
So do all law enforcement march to the same drum, or is it different in my county than it is other places? And if so, how do I find
The
out?
Fort Bend DA is pretty cool. your Fort Bend DA is pretty cool.
You know, they're not going to give you a promise, right? I mean, that's the thing. State law prevents a prosecutor or a city official from promising not to enforce state law. But I think, 99.99% likely that you're not going to face any problems for personal use in your backyard.
Well, and if you do, then you need to be calling the news station and saying, listen to the shit that just happened to me. I was in my yard. I'm an adult. I'm hurting no one. I'm self-medicating, and the government came in. I mean, Fort Bend's a pretty red county. I think the people in Fort Bend would be upset about that.
Well, and I think that's also to the point of that privilege. I think that you should own that. And if there was a scenario where you had to react to enforcement that you believe to have been wrong or inconsistent, quite frankly, I believe you're already in a different viewpoint from being a white male and this happening in your backyard. And I think that news story would hold a lot of power, because the reality is it's probably one that a lot of people can relate to that don't look like you. And we don't see those testimonies often from the different demographics. And that's honestly what I was getting to on what it's going to take. We've got to start making it be realized that there is no demographic line on the use of cannabis, and there is on the enforcement piece. And so I think owning that privilege and trying it, as it was mentioned, it could go a long way.
I mean, you make cool with your neighbors, right?
Anything to drink, you really got to. That's what that. I got to sell it. Okay, to stay over. He's not worried about how they're going to get it back. I'm really not worried about that person. I'm worried about me trying to make sure that I don't piss off cops or piss off somebody, that they might come in and raid my store. If they just stuff. What I know right now is they going at least until October. Okay? And then I've got to think of things that are coming in that usually that I have to circumvent. That I still make money. I'm not in this for my love. You can get it. I'm not in this for love. I make it basic. And this thing, I want to bring money. I'm going to give them to a kid. I'm not out there to do that. Every day that's got from the state all the way up. Pretending to get which is bullshit. It's all about money. Who gets what? And that's what we're worried about. That's why I'm saying I want to see kind of all the kind of he's got like I want to they come here, Randy. You got THC all over the place. They think race to go hard for the whole.
Yeah, but I mean, so from my perspective, you're a business. So good luck with a jury in Texas, right? And does that help? You still have to hire a lawyer. You still might spend a night in jail. I'm not saying it's easy, guys, right? But it's worth the fight. And so I think that it's just not being fearful about the what ifs, doing the best you can, keeping your books, having your testing, making sure your paperwork's in line, and boldly going and doing it and saying, come and take it. I mean, we need to get back to that Texas spirit of we're adults. With what we do in the privacy of our own homes, if it's not harming others, is our own damn business. And I think that we just have to try it, and we just have to keep going, and we have to do the best we can and be intellectually honest and vulnerable in the process.
But I do want to touch on what you said about it being money. I don't believe it's all about money. I understand money is going to be the root of it all, but to be honest, that discretion piece is what they're fighting the most about. Without their ability to have that fear factor that that was just mentioned, there is no probable cause that they can use to target certain demographics.
I was saying what kind of THC that they got. I mean, with all other stuff, they just want somebody to be this fat.
Yeah, no, it's all those rats eating it in Houston, right?
We are looked at it honestly, oh man.
I-
Really,
I do think we had another question over in the back room that I wanted to get to. Well, now it wasn't kind of a question. Y'all kind of touched on the testimony part. My name is CJ Blake. I'm actually a children's trauma therapist out of Houston, Texas. I'm also the president of the Students for Sensible Drug Policy chapter at UH and the head of the Psychedelic Society of Texas chapter. So, God, I'm doing the grassworks work. But actually, last summer, I was drugged and wrecked my truck. I flipped, and they found probable cause because they found leftover roach. And then they searched me, and they found a polka dot chocolate bar, which you can buy in a gas station. And also, they found I was charged with 2 5-year mandatory minimum felony charges. For the last 2 years, I've been going through the mental anguish of, having felony charges while also being a children's trauma therapist. And it has been an absolute nightmare. I've spent thousands of dollars, upwards, and $20,000 now. I'm currently on probation. Thank God, shout out to the teacup program and we're on probation. But I just want to say, sure, when y'all are up there always telling us, talk to your friends, talk to y'all's friends. You said the badge is what's going to get you in. Talk to y'all, like the other senators, the other fancy folks. Like, nobody's going to give a shit to talk about people that look like with tattoos and all this and that now has a felony charge for something that I bought at a gas station. And so that's why I want to, you are kind of being a little flippant up there about no, but we need y'all that are already up there, y'all that are our senators, y'all that are our policymakers. Like, I wear this drug policy reform hat. Bullshit. They don't give a shit what I say when I go up there, meet with everyone in their offices. Sure, they're saying, hey, take your name. Thank you for coming in. But it's y'all that need to talk to your friends, your family. And I just want to say
They don't like us.
But that's all our data. But
I even have Dan Patrick on speed dial.
Yeah.
I do troll him on Twitter, though.
I do appreciate the sentiment, but I think you need to also realize that we work for you. So we do have colleagues. I mean, we're up here. We're arm in arm with y'all at the Capitol. We're already doing the same work that you're doing, and we can absolutely talk to our colleagues. But what is more powerful is you talking to your friends who vote our colleagues in.
Absolutely.
The people that are elected to serve you need to represent what it is, and we can only do so much as individual elected officials. We need to have collective voice. We need to have a shared vision that we all can be working towards.
Absolutely. Well, and I think you touched on it, the shared vision we just see here. There's like rupture, there's fracturing, we all need to come together, I think, a little bit more, but y'all are on the right track. I appreciate this talk today. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And we're just about a time, but I want to ask one quick question, just quickly, for all of you, since we touched on the state level. But next section, what is one most important, achievable change that each of you would like to see occur?
Achievable? You didn't give us time to prepare on this.
Yeah.
I don't know. I will say this. I think everyone here should be involved in their local politics. Be a precinct chair. If you live in a Republican area, be a Republican precinct chair. If you live in a Democratic area, be a Democratic precinct chair. Local, like as small, and start local, and then it spreads and it gets bigger. But we have to start putting people in places of power, because let's be honest, with Dan Patrick leading the Senate, nothing is going to get done. And I think, unfortunately, with Trump in DC, what we're seeing at the federal level is, again, big pharma, big tobacco, big alcohol, all the buddies are coming out, and they're guarding their stuff. So I don't know that there's something achievable other than maybe having this October deadline and really trying to stop this ridiculousness on the hemp ban. And
Yeah, I would argue there's some products there, because there is a lot of power behind that in a lot of industry that is fighting it.
Right. And maybe it takes everyone losing access again. And then the grandmas and everyone that is able to get access and they don't have it. And then they have to go to New Mexico or Oklahoma or Louisiana. And those people start getting louder and noisier. And so unfortunately, maybe it does take a total prohibition to wake people up.
I'll jump in. To me, what I kind of stay rooted in is that the people are with us on this. And, this idea that the arc of the arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice, that kind of saying. I think we're going to win. I just don't know when we're going to win, right? And I'm not a big prognosticator on the Texas legislature. Johnson City Council members, they don't listen to me. Actually, whatever we do, they try to do the opposite. So I can't kind of make any immediate promises, but frankly, when the Dan Patricks of the world age out, that's our opportunity. And so it's like, we just have to be ready and build public will, build our movement and just be ready to take power when the time is right.
Yeah, I would agree with Councilmember Siegel. This is really just about keeping your foot on the gas. I'm not optimistic about anything monumental happening this next session. And I hate to be a pessimist to put it in that sense, but I think that the biggest win we're going to have is to continue to fight and prevent bills that will put us back even further from the goals that we're reaching. I believe if we come through this next legislative session and end in the same place that we're at now, I would consider that a win, quite frankly. And I agree, we have to get Dan Patrick out. Once that happens, I think we can start focusing on something that's more tangible on the other side of legalization and full decriminalization.
Yeah, stopping bad bills is definitely a win. I would agree with that. Well, thank you all so much. We are at time, but thank you to our panel for coming and taking the time, and thank you to all of you for your attention and presence here today.